We are delighted to welcome this evening Senator Elizabeth Lockman, known as Tizzy, to be our speaker. She is a Delaware State Senator, District 3, I believe, which is much of Wilmington. She is, I don't know if you're a native Delawarean, but
Not quite. I mean, I've been here from a very young age, and we have history as a family here, but I was born in Massachusetts, so not
well,
quite. You know.
well, I'm sort of the same. I was born in New York City, and then my parents came here. And both of us are products, if you will, of Delaware public education. Tizzy graduated from AI DuPont High School, I from Mount Pleasant.
Mm,
She earned a bachelor's degree at the University of Delaware.
good. At
Um,
New York University, actually,
oh,
and then
New York, I'm
I did
sorry,
my master's.
at New York University, and then a master's degree, did you not, from the University of Delaware?
Correct.
Okay. And do you still function as an adjunct professor at the University of Delaware?
I do. I just had a big block of classes today, so bear with me if I'm a little
Ah,
foggy.
okay. All right. And I know that her legislative career, which began 5 or 6 years ago, has focused on a lot of issues associated with education, but also gun safety,
Mhm.
and prison or reentry, community reentry,
Mhm.
and really a broad range of topics that we tend to discuss in our programs here. So we are just delighted to have you here this evening. The focus will be on educational equity in Delaware. It has been an issue of concern for a very long time.
Sure.
There has been a great deal of study, a number of proposals, and I'm thinking that we may hear about some new options that are being proposed,
Mhm.
that we hope will make a giant step toward improving the quality and the equality of education, particularly in Wilmington. And so are delighted to welcome Tizzy this evening.
Thank you so much. And I'll share my screen in a moment, but I'll just quickly, just do a little bit more of the background and the why. That was wonderful. I consider myself almost a native Wilmingtonian, Delawarean. I grew up at Ninth and Franklin. My mom still lives in the same house there. So I've spent many years driving by um, your church. And so I feel it feels like home to see it. So it's great to be on with you all in that regard. And I am a product of Red Clay Schools, Lewis Elementary, HB Middle, and AI. And so, if you know where those schools are located, you know that that was clearly something that was happening during the busing era. So I went to school with the same kids from K to 12. We sort of took turns going the 10-mile distance between Hockessin and Wilmington. And I had a great experience in the schools. And then I became a mother when I was relatively young, right out of college. And my daughter, who's now 22, which is crazy to say, I have a 3-year-old as well. So big gap, but just the fun will never end. And when she started kindergarten, she started at what was then Highlands and is now Johnson Elementary in the Highlands neighborhood. And it was, just a little over a decade after I had graduated. And I was really taken aback by the difference that I saw and felt, particularly in an urban school setting, particularly when it came to socioeconomic diversity or the lack thereof, and how much had changed in a 10-year period. So I ended up getting that master's at UD to study the issue and ended up becoming an organizer because I really enjoyed being in the PTA, which I'd seen my mom do, and really came to value that parent engagement and wanted to do more building that in others. And so that sort of is what ended up snowballing me into becoming a legislator. And so I'm going to talk a lot actually, about the work that has been generated from that experience. And let me just make sure that I'm able to put it full. And there's that. See if it lets me. Can you see it? All right. How's that? Great. So when I was elected in 2018, and I think when you're a new legislator, you look pretty quickly to try to figure out where your lane is going to be. We all kind of end up inhabiting different lanes, and because what had led me to the legislature in the first place was that sort of that PTA mom role and my study of education policy. Um, I was obviously gravitating in that direction. And I sat down with Representative Nnamdi Chukwucha, who represents the first representative district. Um, we had been at many tables together in the years that I was doing a lot of organizing and talked about our experience. And for the two of us, he's a little older than I am. He had experienced, I think, busing implemented midstream in his schooling. I had experienced it throughout my schooling. But we had both been taken aback by what happened around, that turn of the century when a piece of legislation called the Neighborhood Schools Act was passed, if you're at all familiar with it. And so what that did was it reassigned students to the school closest to their home from kindergarten through fifth grade, although the initial attempt had been to do that throughout the grade span, which sounds pretty innocuous, but it had had sort of the impact of really rapidly resegregating the schools. And that was kind of compounded by the passage in the mid 90s of choice and charter law, which also enabled people with a strong sense of agency and ability to navigate complex institutions to be making different choices other than their assigned school. And then we're also in the No Child Left Behind era where um, standardized testing was becoming very high stakes. Results were being published. We were beginning to label schools and things like that. So I think our experience as sort of students of policy was seeing how this series of events had led to this really rapid abandonment of Wilmington schools and very rapidly increasing concentration of poverty in those schools. And the sort of natural effect of that was this really deep and persistent and very, very difficult to unstick low performance. So that's just a little bit of context. So he and I decided, after some conversations with then Governor John Carney, that we wanted to start an entity that we thought would be able to kind of undo the Neighborhood Schools Act in some way. Now, the Neighborhood Schools Act simply asked school districts to redo their student assignment plans. It's not something that lives in the Delaware Code to this day. So there wasn't anything to repeal. So we had to think about what could we do to start thinking about how to counteract the impacts that we had seen really severely hinder achievement in the city. And so we weren't sure exactly what those things would be, but we thought let's gather a group, and it was actually a renewal of a prior group called the Wilmington Education Improvement Commission that was led by Tony Allen, and Representative Chukwucha and I were both members of it. I was Tony Allen's vice chair. And we had made some inroads in a proposal around changing school districts, but it ultimately failed in 2017 or so. So we were like, let's renew that group, let's rename it, and let's give it the charge of looking deeply at the systemic flaws that are disadvantaging some students in the system. So, I think we come to this work with what I think is a pretty obvious premise that every single child should be able to access a wonderful public school and a high quality education no matter where they live. And that, we have been hearing a call probably in the city since the times that we stopped having a Wilmington school district and moved into the division into four districts, which happened in the late 70s, early 80s. I'll talk more about that. So this call to sort of reunify the city, and how could we do that? So that's part of that work. But the reasoning for doing that, of course, isn't just to move and change lines just to do it. It's to try to instigate a bigger, more holistic set of reforms for the city, and honestly beyond. Okay. So, as I mentioned, we created ourselves, sort of. We reauthorized this entity that was first called WEIC and is now called the Reading Consortium for Educational Equity. And it was established to do policy research and recommend policies to the governor and the Delaware General Assembly. And we don't do that just the two of us as legislators, then nothing would happen because we're always just running around addressing this and that. We were able to secure funding from the state to hire experts and a staffing team from both the University of Delaware and Delaware State University. So we have sort of a blended team of our two major universities helping us to do this research and staffing support. Because if you've been around any task forces, you know that the who is actually in charge sort of behind the curtain is really key. So we're really lucky that we get to work with those universities on that. And of course, our goal and the charge that's written into legislation is to improve academic and learning outcomes for all kids, whether they're in pre-K all the way through to the 12th grade in the city, as well as northern Newcastle County around it, because they've kind of had this shared destiny ever since we last redistricted in due to court order in the late 70s and early 80s. And so we had two pieces of legislation that we passed. You see the initial ones there, one to reform the body and one to specifically ask us to study and make a proposal related to this idea of redistricting. In our very first meeting in, I think it was September of 2019, all the people around that table, and we have a mixed group, probably about 23 to 25 people. It represents all of the superintendents from the school districts in northern Newcastle County, including the vocational technical schools. There's a cross section of sort of community organizational leaders, educators, parents, and legislators, obviously, including members of every caucus. So we have that mix there as well. And so we workshopped as a group to come up with a joint definition of educational equity. And this is what we came up with. It's a lot of words. It's when you have 25 people workshopping a definition, that's what you're going to get. So this is sort of our North Star for what it is that we're working towards. And the idea that in order to have educational equity, it requires us to have safe, secure, and student-focused learning environments where every student is intentionally provided access to the support, resources, and opportunities they need to reach their full academic and social potential, both in and out of the classroom. So that's our guiding definition. And I welcome anyone at any time to raise a hand and ask me a question if you want. Otherwise, I will just keep droning on because, I am a politician after all, and we've been trained to do this, unfortunately. So just a little more nuance around redistricting in the city of Wilmington and sort of the why behind that. So we have about 11,000 students. We have 18 schools within the physical city limits. But there's actually probably closer to 20 governing bodies. So there's four major school districts. There's also the vocational technical schools, Newcastle County VOTEC, and then each individual charter is actually technically a district. Each individual charter school is its own, what we call LEA or local educational agency. And so when you add up the charters and the larger districts, you have essentially 18 to 20 different entities and more when you consider when students are going to some charters and outside of the city with their own boards making decisions about sort of the educational outcomes of our kids. And that, you could look at that on a countywide level as well, just a lot of fracture. But focusing on the Wilmington students, the ones where we're seeing the poorest outcomes and the most sort of disruptive school environments and things like that, we have found that the complexity and the fragmentation is a big part of the reason that we are not able to deliver the adequate school environments and the adequate supports that we think would be necessary to turn that around. And we're not the first ones to say this, so we are not particularly special here. There have been 20 years, so ever since that Neighborhood Schools Act was passed around 2000, 2001, there have been several groups that have gotten together from the Neighborhood Schools Committee that the city put forward, basically predicted what has ultimately happened. That was a group that was led by Ray Jones Avery. If you're interested in that report, I'm sure I could find a digital version for you to check out. It's really a compelling read. And to be honest, the current state of education in the city is probably even worse than they predicted. And then the Wilmington Education Task Force came along. I think that was led by then Senator Margaret Rose Henry. And then the Wilmington Education Advisory Committee established by Governor Markell, which gave way to the first legislatively established commission looking at this, which was the WEIC that I mentioned, that Tony Allen chaired and I actually vice chaired. And we published these two books talking about what we thought was necessary to strengthen Wilmington education. And it was really focused on that governance and unifying governance and reducing, how many governing entities were making all of these disparate decisions. Because the phenomenon that we've come to, I think, just be accustomed to, particularly in the city, is that a family could move a couple of blocks, and this is not uncommon, particularly for families of lesser means or may struggle to stay housed because of eviction or they just choose to move and could find themselves in a brand new school district with a lot of different policies around discipline, special education, whatever that might be. And that is a very disruptive set of conditions for families who are often the ones that are least able to navigate sometimes these systems in the first place. So why add such an additional amount of potential complexity to those who probably have the least capital to deal with that? So currently, this is what our configuration looks like. The black lines are our municipalities. So here we see the city of Wilmington, and so you'll see, over here you've got the Ardens and Ellesmere over here, Newport, but this is where we're really looking at. And then you can see in the color-coded sections what we think is a especially big part of the problem. So we've got four major school districts. We've got Brandywine up here in the green, Red Clay in the pinkish red, Colonial School District in the yellow, and Christina in the purple, which you will notice there's a little purple footprint, we usually call it, here in the city. This is a result of court-ordered set of district lines when we were ordered to better integrate, and the Wilmington School District was disbanded. And it was done, I think, with very good intentions, was that we would be able to socioeconomically, particularly racially, integrate our schools, and that they did not want to create a situation in which everyone was fleeing to Newark. So they wanted the Christina School District in the Newark area to kind of share in this integration plan. It did ultimately end up kind of creating APO, but that's not our story today. But it is part of, the impact that ultimately was had. Appoquinimink, sorry, school district in the Middletown area. But there are not many school districts in the country, I'm not sure the current number, where you see a school district that is, as we say, geographically discontiguous, as Christina is, where you've got one little footprint over here and students traveling quite a few miles down the road to a community that's very different from the one in which they're housed, with no kind of room for even bridging that with communities in between. And I think we've seen the difficulty that that's caused because, well, none of our school districts are necessarily doing a job of which they should be very proud with our lowest income Black and brown students. Christina has persistently, in the last 20 years, been doing the worst in the post neighborhood schools era. Any questions so far before I move on to talking about what we have in mind here? So we have been doing other work other than redistricting in our first few years. Obviously, we've been operating for 5 or 6 years, so we've focused on creating more opportunities to retain educators and go there so it's not distracting. Provided this new scholarship program so that educators who are currently working in our Wilmington schools can enhance their skills. It's not required that they stay in those schools, but that's the incentive. They're only really eligible to receive funds to support their study if they stay in them. We've expanded early childhood seats by the hundreds and created more full day, high quality pre-K opportunities for Wilmington students. We've also secured state funding to support some enhanced wraparound services in our schools. So we've been reaching for what we thought was maybe low-hanging fruit that we could do while we were working on these bigger more structural ideas. And we've had success. Like there's about $10 million a year that is routed toward what you might call reading priorities, like the ones I just mentioned. And we've been seeing some positive impacts of those. And in fact, we created a particular model for the early childhood seats. It's ECAP is the name of the program, Early Childhood Support Program. That it's a state model, state funded, where we worked in some parameters that would make sure that like workers in those environments are better paid and some other metrics. And that model was seen as being so successful. It is now the ECAP model across the entire state. So we've been able to, I think, model um, paths to equity that are not solely focused on Wilmington. So that makes me proud. And I think that's what the Reading Consortium is and should be all about. We are trying to lead the way where we think it is most needed in the city of Wilmington, but I think that there's something to be learned because there are inequities throughout our state. I know we have some folks on from Sussex, and so you may have some familiarity with how that plays out there as well. Um, However, we do have this obligation in the code to look at redistricting, and so we have been very serious about getting that on track. And this is something that's been, again, spoken about for over a decade in very intentional ways without getting all the way to the finish line. So we decided we were going to start where all the people around our table could agree because there's a lot of contention around where this all would go. So we were like, well, let's just start with the things that we think are the most important and then figure out what would be the possible solutions that could fit those parameters and just keep going from there. So that's what we've done. In May of 2024, we agreed that we think that no more than 2 school districts should govern the city of Wilmington, and that due to the discontiguous nature, the Christina School District should be removed from the city of Wilmington. And then we laid out the process. It's all available on our website, solutionsfordelawareschools.com. We said we have an 18-month timeline, so to develop this plan by the end of this year, at which point we submit this to the State Board of Education, who will have an opportunity to approve it, and then pass it on to the General Assembly for final approval and signature of the governor. So we've been working for 18 months on that. We developed 3 subgroups to work through these 13, we call them stipulations, that are laid out for us again in legislation that established our body of what decisions need to be made in this plan. And then a couple of our members, Ray Jones Avery, the former executive director of the Christina Cultural Arts Center, where I actually worked as an organizer, and Darrell Green, the superintendent of Red Clay, thought it would be a good idea for us to conduct a landscape analysis and do a little bit more of a dive on what are the factors outside of school impacting students' educational outcomes so that anything that we propose can take that into account and enable the districts that might be taking on these students to do a better job of serving them. Because as I mentioned, no district is really getting great outcomes with our highest need students. And then this is kind of a gift from my co-chair, who's our former Lieutenant Governor and former Attorney General, Matt Denn, that we also are going to attach some what we call big ideas for policy reform. So not just changing lines. He's got me singing from the songbook. We can't just change the lines. We also have to make sure that we are making really strong recommendations for reforms to come along with it, things we should be investing in, et cetera. And I'll try to move a little bit more quickly, and then we can just return to any of these slides that you wish. So these are the stipulations. I'm not going to read them all word for word. That would be painful, but just the idea of not doing something that's overly disruptive in the reassignment of students as a result of any redistricting. Some requirements here of a plan that allows students to stay where they are throughout the grade span there. Figuring out transportation is a huge one. And also coming up with I think, minimally disruptive and strategic timetable for actually implementing all the different parts of our plan. And that's our operational impact subcommittee will lead that. And that is led by Simone Silver, who currently is an executive Christiana Care, and Deirdre Joyner, who's the superintendent of the Christina School District. Our fiscal impact subcommittee is going to look at the fiscal pieces, capital implications, how we fund this, even looking at some potential revenue reforms that might need to be made to be more supportive of this. Because one of the biggest issues in Wilmington is our relatively inadequate tax base to support education. And this is led by Erin Bass, who is the school leader at Eastside Charter School, and Emily Falcon, who is the Chief Financial Officer for the Colonial School District. And then finally, we have a community engagement subcommittee, which is led by Stephanie Ingram, who's the president of the Teachers Union, and Maria Cabrera, who's an at-large member of the Wilmington City Council. And their job is to try to make sure that we're getting the word out and adequately consulting with a wide range of appropriate members of the community, sort of everyone, but strategically various members of the community for input and to make sure that they are aware of this throughout the whole process. And so we've been doing that for a while. They have formed an educator advisory panel, have been doing working groups, and are working in concert with another group doing reform work in the city, which is called the Wilmington Learning Collaborative. As I mentioned, revenue policy is one of the big ideas that we are letting our fiscal impacts folks investigate. They're talking about things like referendum reform, looking at the tax pool that was established when we split into the 4 districts, and seeing how we can bring that up to date. There's a lot that has been sort of frozen and out of whack for many years. That was part of the motivation for reassessment, which we do not need to get into. It has been a rocky road there, but all of us legislators are working very intently to get that right as well. And then also looking at how can we invest even further in early learning, because while we've increased the seats, there's a lot of kids who still aren't getting preschool and early care. And the trend nationally is to make sure there's some provision from birth to kindergarten for especially higher needs, lower income families. And looking at before and after school and summer programs, making sure that there's high quality programs that are connected to outcomes being delivered, and school choice. So issues of what kind of programs are being offered, how are people accessing them, charter schools, student assignment. This is something that has been pretty controversial. We've had almost 30 years of choice in charter policy, and there's positives and there are negatives. And so we think this could be an opportunity to talk about reform in that space, to build on the positives and try to root out some of the negative implications that have grown inequity as a result of some of our school choice policies to date. So we've been doing our thing, bringing people together, hosting large retreats to help us narrow down what we think are the best possible options that fit that 2 or fewer and no Christina school district standard that we set for ourselves. And we just had the launch, or the sort of pre-final community engagement meeting around that landscape analysis, which was really very touching. We had students presenting on their actual experience. This slide's a little confusing, so I'm actually going to skip over that one. So, so what you see on the left, I'll just leave it at that, are the 9 options that we suggested were the possibilities that suited that definition: 2 or fewer districts and no Christina. And so with each subsequent retreat, we've had conversations and gotten more data and have narrowed it, taken votes as a consortium to narrow down the options we were interested in. So last May, we did that. We quickly eliminated, I think really on the strong advice of superintendents, the 3 options where we suggested perhaps a single district could just sort of swallow Wilmington whole. Red Clay would expand to take it on, or Colonial or Brandywine. Very unpopular idea with the superintendents who just thought that would overtax a single existing school district. So we had several others which took 2 of the 3 remaining districts and talked about how they could each split the city. And then we had the 3 sort of consolidation options: 1 going back to the old Wilmington School District, 1 forming a sort of a metro in the upper northern part of the county. I'll show you maps in just a second. And then one that would actually consolidate all of northern Newcastle County north of Aberquinimink School District. So those six stayed on the table after May. And then, I'm trying to see how, okay. And then at our uh, we affirmed these six, and then in the wake of that, at our following retreat that we affirmed this past July, we don't have a slide like this for that. We eliminated the two options that include Colonial. So because Colonial doesn't actually have any schools in the physical city of Wilmington and serve about 200 and some of our overall 11,000 students, ultimately it was decided that let's not consider Colonial for expansion into the city. And then because of the research that was done on tax base and the concentration of poverty that would be likely to result from just isolating the city on its own as a school district, the Wilmington School District was eliminated. And that came with some consternation because some people have really fond memories of the Wilmington School District and would love to sort of have that return. But ultimately, it was not approved to continue. So we are now down to these three options for further consideration for us to choose one, we hope, in November of this year. And that would be Brandywine and Red Clay sharing the city. Sometimes it's been called the River Plan, where you have perhaps Brandywine north of the river and Red Clay south of the river, but there's a couple of different ways you could slice that. And then that idea of a metropolitan district, which would essentially take the entire city, Red Clay and Brandywine, and combine them into one sort of new consolidated district. And then, as I mentioned, kind of surprised me how much momentum the idea of a northern Newcastle County district has taken on, where that's taking all of those four school districts and combining them. So you get that unification for the city of Wilmington, but you also get everyone sort of unified together on one team. These are just some of the things that have been surfaced at our various town halls that people are most concerned about. So just sort of evidence of the conversations we've been having to support this. And as I mentioned, we voted to affirm those three options. So this is what those could potentially look like, with the red line being what I would say to look at, where, in the red writing, you get a sense of like Red Clay on one side of the line, Brandywine on the other. And so these are just some different ways of where you could put the border, which would need further deliberation. For a northern Newcastle County School District, as I mentioned, it's that red line. It's everything north of Aberquinimink School District, all becoming one. And then Metro is an abbreviated version of that, which has the city combined just with the uppermost two school districts. So that's what's currently on the table. And we also voted in July to look more closely at some of these big ideas. We formed a committee and we've been meeting almost weekly to refine those ideas and start getting cost estimates to go along with them so that the consortium can decide which of these big ideas we want to attach to our redistricting proposal. Obviously, money is not limitless, so we're going to have to make some difficult decisions about what we think is actually affordable, but hopefully we can be providing something of a roadmap of the various pieces that we think will make, give us the best chance of becoming that world-class school system that we believe that we can be and deserve to be. As I mentioned, we had that social drivers landscape analysis, which we partnered with the American Institute for Research, the national research entity, and they've been working for almost a year with us on this and with students and with focus groups of community members on some of the things outside of education or within schools that we can do that we need to be also raising awareness at every level of public governance, not just school governance, that is having a really big impact for those neediest students when it comes to trying to find success in the system. And so those are issues of public safety in our city, issues of unaddressed mental health, housing instability, and pretty patchy transportation networks. And so wanting to make sure that these are also being considered alongside any school reform, as opposed to just asking our school systems to absorb the impact of these going unaddressed, which I think has probably been the status quo for many years. So these are some of the quotes that came directly from kids who are currently in high school and have grown up, or this is a parent, sorry, um, and living in some of our most struggling communities in the city. And so, they were talking about perhaps not making the highest quality school options, in part because they're, not wanting your child to have to walk through a certain area to get to a school bus and things like that, having to experience this sort of trauma of that having in your community, public drug use. These are very real and impactful things. Um, and so that isolation that people are choosing versus going out and engaging more in school or making different choices about where your child is in school, it was a big one that came up. And then, of course, also looking at the kind of the stigmatized nature of seeking mental health supports. We've done a lot of work in Dover to make sure that there's more resources being provided to our K-12 system to help students and, perhaps even family members address these things. But there's still a mixture of awareness and uptake in those services. So trying to figure out how to address some of those stigmas and lack of awareness. And then, of course, that mobility, that transience that a lot of families are facing. There are things that if we were able to ultimately address them um, in our state, we think would end up having a positive impact on, the struggle that a lot of families are facing that are inhibiting them from having their students be able to be more successful in these institutions. So it's not schools alone. And again, barriers to being able to access after school opportunities and even getting to schools in some cases. When a student misses a bus, we have a lot of schools that students are assigned to that aren't even served by public transit. And so you have a child who then opts just to kind of hang out in the home neighborhood and, hang around but not be in school. And then, of course, again, that increases exposure to some of these traumatic elements in a community. So just something to be considered. This is some data in terms of student mobility, what we see from students moving around and changing schools. We can really see this transience just going from school to school to school or district to district with these red hotspots, which tend to align with some of our most struggling communities. I spoke a little bit our process timeline, so I don't need to go too much into that, but you can, we're actually in October now, so we can move the red arrow. And we are getting ready to have our final retreat soon. And hopefully get to a point where we choose one of those three options and start going through the formal public hearing process and state board and General Assembly consideration of that. Let's skip those really quick. So, we haven't made those decisions yet, as I mentioned, but we are going to be doing that very soon. And I'm not going to walk us through all of these questions, but some of the next things that are coming in terms of our public-facing engagements. We have this educator advisory panel town hall. It's the second of two, and that'll be next week. Our community engagement subcommittee has a meeting. Actually, so does our discretionary group on the 21st. That should be on there too, to talk about choice policy. And then we have, as I mentioned, that big retreat coming on the 28th to try to narrow us down to one of the three options, which we will, if all goes well, affirm on November 6th. And then we'll be just drafting the plan for submission to the state board. So that is an overview of what we've been working on for the past few years. I hope that was clear and helpful. And I'm very happy to talk about any of it or go on a tangent in any direction. But yeah, I really appreciate your attention. And we think we're onto something. We've been really pleased with the feedback that we've gotten. And again, I think this is about looking at the places where our structural issues are causing the worst outcomes. And I think in being attentive to that and putting ourselves on a path to solving that is going to give us tools to address inequities across the system throughout the county and throughout the state. So happy to happy to talk and hear what your thoughts are.
Tizzy, if you want to unshare your screen,
Oh, sure can.
we will go to the full group. If I can make my part of this magic work. There we go. All right. Phew.
I know, it's a lot. We tried to narrow it down.
Yeah, no, the complexity of the situation and the history. This you're not trying to fix something that's been in place for 6 months. What led us to this point um, has profound, deep roots uh,
Hmm.
in the
It
area,
does.
and I'm just astonished at the range of issues that are addressing that need to be addressed. Uh,
Mhm.
so let's just open it up and see what questions, what comments do you have? If you're still swallowing the data, but Roger.
Wow, a lot there. So just to say, our kids went to Lewis and HB and
Oh,
AI and had a great experience.
yeah.
I remember going down to Lewis. I remember going to the PTA meetings, maybe one or two, not too much. And but I thought that was good. We think it was good, the experiences that they had growing up, seeing lots of different demographics and lots of, you know, different, types of people and
Hmm.
different situations. It was good. They all went on to college and UD and did well.
Hmm.
So that system worked.
I
What?
agree. There's
Yeah,
evidence for that too. I mean, I've heard a former superintendent describe sort of the outcomes in that in I guess it was particularly the late 80s as the high water mark. And we are now, I think, at 37th in the nation for outcomes. So we
yeah,
really turned the ship in that sort of early mid 90s period. Um, and yeah, it hasn't paid off.
right. I agree. I mean, when you see the rise or the fall of AI
Mm.
to where it is now and the growth of, the charter schools, great for the charters, but it just seems uneven, unequal, unfair, somehow. Whatever the choice and the charter have done somehow got changed.
Hmm.
But I had a question about addressing absenteeism.
Oh.
Will that absenteeism kind of direct you towards that one district type of idea? Because it's just easier to keep track of the kids if you got one district controlling all of the kids that have the really high absenteeism rate.
I mean, I think the short answer is yes. I think our read on it, and just even in talking to like the service providers that the districts really rely on to help with a lot of those social supports for students, have made it very clear that the fragmentation of districts that they have to interact with really inhibits their ability to deliver on their potential as social support organizations. So I think that would be a pretty clear indicator that yes, I think there's any of a host of things that we are our theory of change here is that will be easier to manage when you have a consolidated central office instead of this being replicated over and over when we have people who are highly mobile in the greater Wilmington area.
Mhm.
Um, and we have toyed with in the discretionary recommendations, the big ideas, talking about how we might make more targeted investments in chronic absenteeism specifically, because that has been really highlighted as an area of focus that should be part of all of this. And because we've seen some real severity there in post COVID, like there's students who just, I mean, we you can presume maybe they left the state, but there's just kids we don't know where they went in recent years. So yes, I mean, I think it's how do you give yourself a governance structure that allows for you to more methodically accomplish these types of things. And our case is that we're is making is that if you unify it and you have fewer disparate moving parts in a relatively small geographic area, you're going to be able to have a smoother go of it. And the city of Wilmington, well, actually, city council recently established what they're calling the Office of Educational Advocacy. This was something that was actually recommended by some sort of civil rights groups of education advocates I've been working with when I was an organizer. And the idea is that because Wilmington does not have a governing role in schools, that they should attempt to build somewhat of a unified voice that can be raised because it's been diluted by the division of districts for so many years. And they hired a director maybe 6 months ago. Her name is Dr. Laritha Odumasu. She has led schools and done a lot of turnaround work, and I think she's fabulous. And she, I think, considers herself to be something of an expert on chronic absenteeism issues and ways to address those. So I know she is chomping at the bit to tell us how this new district or her office as a supporting player to a new district could help make that happen. So I'm very, very excited about her, very excited about that as a complement to our proposal. But it's definitely in focus.
Good, great. And it's not a consolidated district such as in what Northern Newcastle County District isn't just too large. I mean, on the scale of all school districts in the country, like New York and California, where there's probably massive.
There are mass. I mean, it would probably, I mean, it would be above average, I think, actually. So I think it would put us with about 40,000 students. So it would be numerically a little bit above average. We have, especially, in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, that sort of more townshipy orientation where you've got really small districts. There's a case for that. But I think we are looking at, like a Maryland, a Virginia, where you do have more frequently counties of student bodies that are larger than our state that function very well. And so I think we're making the proposal that that is something that we should be considering given the challenges that we've faced recently, that it's a worthy risk at having a large school district to be able to again address some of these fragmentation challenges. And I think there are ways that other places manage the difficulty that that can bring. I'm obsessed, well, it's probably not too strong of a word, with Jefferson County in Kentucky, which is the full county that contains Louisville, and the way that they do it. Because they've really maintained a commitment to exactly what you described. I went to, the same schools as your children, and they had a positive experience of socioeconomic integration and wanted to maintain that as a value for equity. We did not do that here. But so what they did when they consolidated the whole county around the city was sort of create zones, sort of clusters of schools. And that was their way of making sure people were able to equitably access different types of programs, as opposed to, a school like a Cab Calloway becoming a magnet for perhaps more privileged or, more high agency families. Yeah, so they have a really interesting way of utilizing their countywide district to both encourage people to stay close to home and make sure that they get good programs close to home, but giving them the opportunity to go further afield. So that was appealing to me as a Wilmingtonian, was that I really had this fear of us locking in our highest poverty kids in Wilmington in ways that we see in other cities, like a Camden, or even the city of Philadelphia. That didn't seem like it was going to be a progressive way to approach this problem. So I think you give yourself a larger tax base, more socioeconomic diversity overall in that student body, and it gives you a lot more ways to use choice and charters and whatever to actually encourage integration instead of working against it, which it has been doing.
Yeah, that's a great statement to say, get the charters into the system so that they help rather than
Yeah.
hurt the
Yeah.
whole system. So I
Yeah.
think what you're saying is there's a second tier, say a large district, but a second tier of organization, which is, well, let's have three magnet schools. You don't send them all to one.
hmm
Right.
Exactly. If the art school's in high demand and has a long waiting list, let's make sure there's one in every corner of the county so
Right.
that all the kids who want it can access it instead of just making it competitive, cutthroat, tough luck if you don't get in the lottery.
Yeah, right.
Like, why do we have to do it that way? That doesn't really make sense to me.
Yeah.
I
Great.
don't
Thank you.
know. That's just my mom thinking too. It's like I don't want my kid to get a decline in the mail. Like, you know, you want your child to have access to the best. And I don't think being the best should mean um, it is a rare opportunity. Like I think something I've heard other parents describe is this sense that like you can sort of carve a golden path for your child through our current system. But even the most well-resourced parents, I know, are incredibly stressed out about navigating that because you never know at any term if you're gonna get in or not get in to the best option. My daughter, you know, after Highlands went to HB as a feeder, and then got into charter school, Wilmington. So like we had a great path there, and I still found, I think, the overall feeling that I had compared to the experience I had as a student was of sort of depressed excellence. It doesn't feel like the tide is rising and the boat's with it. It feels like mediocrity is overtaking everything.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions. I
So
know.
what do you see happening to the consortium after next June?
So, I love that question. Thank you. We were very intentional when we renamed it to take Wilmington out of it. So it was the Wilmington Education Improvement Commission before. And we took Wilmington out of it in part because we thought maybe it carried a little too much political baggage with my colleagues in Dover, but also because while we were intent that we were going to keep focusing on the Wilmington problem and get it done, still going 5 years later, but I think it would be wonderful for us to have this entity that continues to operate in our state, sort of moving on to the next horizon of inequity. So you know, well, I won't name any particular names of colleagues, but I have one colleague from Kent County who serves, so you could Google this, as a representative of the minority caucus in the Senate. And, you know, I think maybe he might have some objectives for equity in his district. And you know, so we can reauthorize the body with a new mission, and I can hand the reins over to one of my colleagues to figure out what are we going to do in Dover? What are we going to do in Georgetown? Doesn't have to be redistricting, but just have an entity that continues to maintain a focus on equity in our state wherever it's most needed.
Yeah, because it would seem that with the incredible range of issues that need to be addressed and the work that's going to be need to be done, and nobody's going to snap their finger and it's all going to be fixed in 20 minutes. How do we make sure that this isn't just a point in time, great ideas, let's do
Hmm.
this, and
Yeah.
then
You
and
monitor, right? And you maintain that monitoring function. Because I think as we've learned from our own, you know, even just the last 25, 30 years of history is that if you let up, if you take your foot off the gas, and I think to me, the busing era, you know, was the foot on the gas, and you take your foot off of it, and it's not just going to keep running down the road forever. It stops. And you know, so my hope is that we don't, yeah, just have this be a flash in the pan, but that we continue to monitor and push and maintain, well, I wouldn't even say maintain, grow a commitment to equity in our state, and maintain it once we've built it.
that seems to me, I mean, what you're doing is incredibly complex and challenging. I mean, the number of stakeholders in this are countless. I mean, you talk about 18 schools and 20 this, but there are like thousands of
Hmm.
stakeholders in all of this.
Yeah.
And certainly the engagement of the community through the process. I'm out here in Hockessin. My kids went through HB, AI, you know, the whole thing.
It's the
Um,
best.
but that was a few years ago. Uh,
Hmm.
and indeed, I went to my first school board meeting 2 years ago.
Oh, oh, wow.
Um, it's because I never thought it was very, well, I don't know, it just never bubbled its way to the top of the things to do. But I discovered that there is a role to play.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether you still have kids in the school district or not. Uh,
Amen to that.
and making your voice heard, um, maybe just a little step at a time, but it also elevates the importance of this and the fact that this is not just an inner city Wilmington issue or problem.
Not at all.
So I commend you for the work, and I, fingers crossed. Um, it's, kind of not a study that is meets with great approval and gets put on a shelf, and a few years later
Hmm.
somebody pulls it out and blows the dust off and says, gosh, that seemed like a great idea, what happened to it? So I
Yeah.
think that's going to be a real challenge. And if there are ways to engage members of the community who don't have a personal stake in what's currently happening, but got a lot of retirees with a lot of time and a lot of desire to see children succeed. And
Yeah,
it's
absolutely. And I
very
think reassessment has reawakened us. We were reminded that we have these school districts that we might not engage with every day. And so I'm hoping maybe that sparks something. People might be asking questions. So if you're in a conversation like that, maybe encourage folks to think about opportunity, like that we have a very real opportunity to kind of renew this thing and have something that will be something that we can be proud of as Delaware instead of, folks living across the line and working in, that old saw. So like, I think, yeah, let people know that there's something cooking that could, I think, make a big, big difference for our state and our city, and that'll benefit us all.
we
Hmm.
sure hope so. Yep. Sandy.
Um, One thing that always was rather painful for me was when we would have referendums that we wanted, the schools will work so hard to try to get people out to vote yes because we need the funding. And, um, I'm now the retired age, and I would always be so upset when retired people would show up so they could vote no because they don't want their taxes to go up. And
Right.
it was always very emotional for me, because I believe you have to fund your schools. Is it going to continue to be by referendum in that way, or is it the
I think
budgeting?
an opportunity for reform in that area. That proposal has been made several times in recent years, and I think there's some renewed momentum there. And I know that the consortium we have voted in the past to recommend that we no longer rely upon the referendum process. Now, that's really just about giving different tools in the toolkit for the school board. It's ultimately the school board's decision if they want to accept the ability to raise taxes within parameters that they're given without going out to referendum. They could still do that if they wanted. Um, but so I think there's an opportunity for us to give to all of our school districts what our VOTEC districts actually already have, which is an ability to raise um, in sort of in collaboration with the legislature, as opposed to the one opportunity that we give people to vote yes or no on taxes. I don't think it's shocking when they want to vote no on them.
Yeah. Well, we've had a number of people give programs. We've had several on the Wilmington Learning Collaborative.
Great.
It was being formed, and as it began its operation, we've had speakers talking about House Bill 218. It's the one that mandated more inclusive education.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things that really struck me in all of these programs is how incredibly decentralized the education system is in
Hmm.
Delaware. You think, well, here's a bill and it says you have to do this.
Hmm.
And so the Board of Education says, here's what we're going to do about more inclusive education. And a school can do it, cannot do it,
Yep.
cannot be. And it's sort of like,
Yeah. And that's what we see. We see, at least if we just even leaving charters aside, just stick with the four big districts, four different ways of doing that, four different sets of capacity for enforcement. And that's, I think that's where sort of the Christina issue has kind of bubbled up because while no one's hitting it out of the park, we see a special um, just sort of depth of the problem in their city schools. I mean, every school district and every school has something to be praised. I'm a deep believer of that because there's a lot of people in those buildings working really hard and showing up. So I'm not ever trying to just shame any school or district, but they've really had a difficult time. And then just for those families, if you're moving from one district to another and they're doing these things in 4 different ways, how do you keep up?
I don't know. Yeah. Well, the people that you've named who are involved in this, many of them are, if not household names, certainly well-known
Mhm.
in the community, both from a governmental and an educational standpoint. So I commend you for the work and any ways that you can inform us.
Mhm.
And if there are ways to make our voice heard, please do let us know. That is something that we have the ability to accomplish, and we would like to do what we can to make sure that this is as successful as possible. Because, as you said at the very beginning, every child should have the opportunity to succeed. So,
We can
thank
do
you,
it.
Suzie. Thank you for being here.
Thank you all so much. You're a wonderful audience, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
thank you
Excellent
all. Good night.
Night.
night.